So good morning and good afternoon. And if there's any coming in from EMEA, it's probably good evening. And I'd like to welcome you to our fourth session in our new webinar series, Thursdays. Today's session is Ignite Your DevOps Journey with Discovery Workshops. Before we get started, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. First, as you know, the session is recorded. Everyone will be muted for the session, but we encourage you to ask questions. You will see a Q&A icon. It's usually center in the middle of your screen. Please type in any questions or comments and we'll do our best to answer them all at the end or follow up with you individually afterwards. When you leave, there will be a brief survey that will pop up. We would appreciate if you can complete it. It really does help us get the right information out to all of you, whether it's a future webinar topics or any particular follow-up information. But before I turn it over to Alan and Atul to introduce themselves and to get to the gist of today's presentation, I just have a few words from your sponsor. This series of webinars is all around DevOps. Our goal is to address the challenges organizations have in regards to quality, efficiency, and velocity in every stage of the infinity loop and how to combat them. While we tend to lean towards addressing these challenges on the mainframe environment, today, the mainframe and distributed worlds are tightly coupled, so a challenge in one can and does impact the others. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Atul and Alan.
Terry, thanks very much. So we'll just do a bit of an introduction about ourselves in a second, but as Terry said, please do enter your questions in the chat or the Q&A panel, and we'll try to take some of the questions towards the end. And if we fail to answer all of them, then we will make sure we feed back to you afterwards also. So with that, Alan, you want to introduce yourself first of all?
Sure. Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. My name's Alan Johns. I am what they call a technical account manager for BMC. I've been working for BMC now for 2 years. And I've been concentrating a lot on the DevOps side of our tool chain and what we can do for our customers in helping them modernize their mainframe development environment.
Great. Thanks, Alan. And myself, my name is Atul Burban. I've been with BMC and before that CompuWare for over 20 years. My role has evolved now, and as my title states on the screen, I'm a DevOps advisor working with organizations around the world to help them have a better idea of how to set their roadmap going forward in terms of their modernization or transformation journey. So Alan and I have been discussing this matter over the last few weeks, really, and we thought it'd be something interesting to share with our audience in terms of why we work with our customers to run what's called discovery workshops and the value they get from that. And what we'll be doing is we'll be going through a number of questions and answers just to give you some more insights. And before we go any further, we're going to turn off our cameras now because our handsomeness is going to distract you, I think, from, from viewing the content of our slides. So Alan, let's turn off our cameras and then move on with the actual content itself. So just moving ahead, in terms of just providing a little bit of context for you as to why these discovery workshops are so important. We know that a lot of organizations around the world, they're looking to try to understand or establish their current baseline state. How do they do things at the moment? So before they introduce any change into their organization, they need to baseline where they are currently. And they also often need to think about how to develop some key metrics. How are we going to measure whether any changes we introduce into our processes, tooling, changes with people, for example, if they're providing value or not. And going forward, they'll be looking at automation with APIs, webhooks, implementing quality gates, and automated CI/CD pipelines. Now, with all of these transformations, quite a lot of organizations quite often struggle. And it's not surprising when working with code that was written decades ago. Also now they've got a retiring workforce, which also means retiring knowledge, and using tools and processes that are outdated. It's not surprising that they struggle with that. So change is something that's inevitable. and we all have to learn to deal with that. Now, that's where modernization and DevOps efforts come into play. But rather than just dealing with that, we want to make sure that we make change your advantage. Okay, so let's embrace that. And as I said earlier, Alan and I have come up with some key questions and answers that we think will help you to think better about how you can leverage discovery in your own organization and make some meaningful decisions going forward. Now, before we move on to those questions, Alan and I have spared no expense in creating a one-page handout for you, and it nicely summarizes some of the key points from our discussion today. So we will send that out to you after today's meeting itself. So with that, let's get started. And I've got the first question for Alan here. So Alan, what drives companies to look at their current state of development?
That's a good question. Before I tell you about my experiences with our clients, I'd just like to share a brief story from my personal life, just to set the context. I was looking after my grandson one day. He's about 6 years old, and he was getting really frustrated because he couldn't do his new Star Wars jigsaw puzzle. So we had a little discussion, and we chatted about how much easier it would be to complete the puzzle if we put all the pieces out on the table facing outwards, and if we could see the box cover so we could see what the final picture was supposed to look like. So he thought about it for a minute, looked at me and said, "Oh, okay." And then we were all smiles after that. He just needed to see the problem from a different angle. And in much the same way, a lot of companies are realizing that they have to evolve or rethink their way of working to see it, approach it from a different angle. Often this is because they want to be better at what they do, which is understandable. They want to do things better. They want to do things faster, perhaps with greater security, because they're failing compliance requirements, or the mainframe is seen as a blocker to an agile way of developing their code. We've come across a lot of reasons, but one thing is for sure, these companies have realized that their survival depends on that change, depends on discovering what they can do, the art of the possible. Technology has moved on, and there are new ways of working. Their competitors are advancing, and there's simply no room in the market for companies, or dare I say people, who do not want to move and change. They would just want to stand still.
So you make some good points there, Alan, and I've seen it firsthand. Organizations sometimes go into panic mode because they realize they have to change. It's not luxury anymore. It's actually a matter of survival. So yeah, very good points made there.
So given what I've just said, Atul, what difference have you seen when working with organizations who have gone through this discovery process and those who haven't?
Okay, so from my experience, and I've worked with quite a lot of our customers in doing this, there is a huge difference. So let me talk about, first of all, those who have not embraced discovery, okay? So those who have not embraced it. And they tend to make more kind of tactical decisions. They tend to be short-term and quite limited in value because it can't be sustained. So that's quite critical for them. And they often initially feel really good. They're doing something and they're doing it in the name of being proactive, which is great. But as I said before, they can't sustain any benefits because it just fizzles out. It's not been programmed into their strategy, really.
Yeah.
And they're also quite often the ones who are inflicting change on their teams. So the change is being led by the managers, and the workers simply have to follow the new way of working. They have no choice or no say in whatever the changes are that are being introduced to them, really.
Yeah.
So I don't like it when I see it, because I know there's going to be no happy ending at the end of this initiative for them. But if we now look at the companies that are investing in discovery, what they're doing is, in my mind anyway, they're slowing down to speed up, okay? And they tend to take time to gather all the right people. They create a safe environment for everybody to collaborate. And together, they will map out the goals. They also want to understand the challenges, what they do well, and what they don't do so well as well. And that part can be painful sometimes, because what they're doing is admitting that some things that they've been doing for many years isn't working any longer. So there is pain there when we have to kind of admit that it's not working. And just to kind of underline that, I'll give you just one example. We had an organization that had been using an in-house written source code management solution for decades. And they've been used to it for a long time. And they realized that it just wasn't fit for purpose. Now, rather than becoming defensive, the administrator for that system was very forward-thinking. And they realized that things needed to change, and the admin was going to be instrumental in replacing that system with our very own ISPW. So I think it's people like that that make a huge difference. And I think that's a classic example of where the change, whatever form it takes, isn't owned by the management. It's everybody's responsibility. So I think it's a great question you've asked, and there is a massive difference between the two.
Yeah, I think the whole concept of working collaboratively now is becoming so important for all customers, and the willingness to accept the fact that you need to get that information out there around the customers, around their own people, to make really good decisions.
Yeah.
It is key to be able to get the right thing done.
Excellent. So I've got a question for you now.
Yeah.
Why do you think that some teams feel that they don't need to go through a formal discovery exercise?
Well, from my experience, there's a number of reasons. First, it's human nature to follow the line of least resistance. To change things requires time and effort, and people don't want to burn that time and effort. They're busy doing their normal day-to-day job, and maybe they don't see the need for change because everything's working. Another reason might also involve the complexity of the organization we're dealing with. Many organizations they're highly siloed, and the effort in getting all the people together to perform an effective discovery on their development process can be daunting and difficult. As I said earlier, it needs time and effort, but without that effort, problems remain invisible or unconsidered. Yeah. Finally, I think it's always more difficult to perceive a problem from the inside. As the old saying goes, you can't see the wood for the trees. People become invested in their own systems and processes, and they assume that if they see it working, everything's okay. When in fact, an externally run discovery process can often spot those bad practices going on because there is a lack of investiture in that process. They're looking at it more from a very much more open point of view. The trick is to discover that information in a collaborative way, as I said before, and then present that information in a way that overcomes any inherent resistance.
Yeah, and I think another kind of thing to underpin, I think, in your response there is that in collaborating, what everybody in the room is doing is they're owning the challenges and the responses to those challenges. So we're all part of the solution. It's not being inflicted upon us, but we're being invited to join in the transformation that's going to take place. So again, very important. And we all talk about culture change, and I think this is a fundamental part of that to help the culture move forward.
Yeah, I think in all our experience with these types of workshops, it's 50% or more of the work is getting that culture change. That's what tends to be the biggest resistance. Everything else tends to flow on afterward. So what feedback have you received after having been involved in one of these discovery meetings?
So I love this question, because this is the reason why we're here today, to understand the value people get from the discovery exercise itself. And I must say, people are often very reserved at the beginning of the discovery or before it takes place. They can't understand the value of the discovery process. And in my mind, it's understandable, because it can consume a lot of man time without any guaranteed value. So we'll talk a bit later on about the kinds of things that we do to help them understand that. But I think for this question, it's worth sharing some quotes from people who've been through these workshops. And I've got a few notes here. So the first quote was, again, it's quite recently, and they said to me, "I didn't realize that our database and test environment provisioning was such a bottleneck in our delivery process." Because quite often people don't take the view to stand back further to understand the whole process of delivering software to their end production system. I was also told I had no idea my team was having to manually manage and merge multiple versions of the source code. Now, this was a large bank I was working with, and although they were trying to do parallel or concurrent development, they were checking out code, and it's out of control. It's not visible to each other who's taken code out. It was a manual process, but the management had no idea this was taking place. And the final quote I got in front of me here is from operations. And it said, "The ops team is having to manually validate our input files." And they said to me, "If I'd known that before, I could have built that into my batch process. So the validation could have been automated, but it's currently being done manually by the operations team." So things like that crop up. And quite often, people just don't know what they don't know until they get together in a room and have an open and honest conversation. It's a safe conversation. There's no one here to point fingers. And it really is a wonderful feeling to be involved in these discussions where everybody is contributing and everybody's learning from each other. So it is a great feeling.
Yes, so often we see these processes where work is simply being thrown over the fence from one team to another, and they don't necessarily collaborate. They're just part of a linear sequential process. They do their bit and it goes over to the next people, and they do their bit, and they have no idea about what's going on between, either in front of them or behind them. So yeah, it's so easy to slip into that type of mindset.
True. But the good news is things are changing, which is great. So, okay, Alan.
Yeah.
What can attendees expect if they're going to be attending our discovery meeting? What can they expect from the meeting itself?
Well, I think firstly, the attendees are going to find the experience both engaging and informative. We try to keep the atmosphere positive and friendly to encourage the attendees to contribute to the discussion. It's got to be something that they're willing to give up that information. They need to be comfortable to do that. And if the way we construct these meetings, we try to encourage that.
Yeah.
What can the attendees expect? Well, it's going to be an event which is sponsored by their leadership.
Yeah.
So they shouldn't view it as being a waste of their valuable time, because it's already been encouraged and pushed as something that they need to address. They need to look at what they need, and their management is encouraging that by simply organizing the event in the first place. They're going to be led through a process that will explore their current ways of working. It's a bit like my inquisitive grandson asking pointed questions about why, what, how, why do they do something? Why do they not do something? What challenges do they face? What is the impact of that? Their aims, their desired benefits, the perceived risks, and so on. The questions at time may seem obvious, but they have to be said in order to be answered. Or they may even feel them as being somewhat intrusive. But remember that the object is to uncover and learn. It's not a blame game. It's about discovery. It's a safe environment in which that discovery can be done. And we document everything. So if they need to follow up with anything, or if they need to have follow-up meetings, you can do, but we're not going to be putting names and stuff against this stuff. It's not about what are the, going into the issues and going, we've got problems. It's about taking the positive route, taking the requirement, looking at it as a requirement, not an issue, and then going forwards to see what they can do to address it.
Good points. And I think at this point, I would ask our guests to think about, when was the last time you got into a room, either virtually or physically, with your entire lifecycle team and mapped out the current processes? It may be something that you do at the moment, or it may be something you've never done previously. So it's worth thinking about that. And even without our involvement, if you do something like that, I think it's a very healthy approach to regularly reviewing our current state and how to move forward, really.
Yeah, and I think it's something that, as we've seen in many of the meetings we've done before, the workshops, because people suddenly realize that, oh, you do this, or you do that, it gives them a better overall look about what's happening in their work and in what they're doing, and it gives them the opportunity to think about other things, even separate from what they're actually trying to deal with. The fact that they know those people are there gives them a better ability to address other things within their workflow and stuff.
Good point.
Okay, so having discussed what we try to achieve, what are the outputs of the discovery workshops?
So obviously from the discovery workshop, we'll be taking plenty of notes, and we're very transparent, and everybody in the room can have access to those notes. And that's important, because sometimes somebody can say something and we hear something different and we write that down. So we want to minimize any kind of misconceptions or assumptions from our side, really. But after we have those, we will take some time to develop a report. And I can say from experience, no two reports are ever the same, because no two teams, no two organizations are ever the same. So that's something that we can't assume we can simply replicate a report. And we try to keep the report as simple and as to the point as possible, because we want to make it a practical asset to go forward with. And in there, we will add in observations and recommendations, which are based on our experiences and our knowledge. And when I say actually our experiences, our knowledge, I don't mean mine, I mean our whole team. We have a lot of people in our team who have experience of running these workshops, so we can bring in good knowledge. And no one person can pretend to be the guru of everything. So that's important. And I think one of the advantages we bring is that we are working with many other customers. So we have lots of insights to share. And then the report, once it's been created, we will discuss it openly with our customer. And this is now their asset. And it's up to them to then make informed decisions and to define their own priorities and to define what action they want to take out of that. So this is gold when it comes to making decisions. They've now got insights they didn't have before. Now, one of our objectives as BMC is to make sure that our customers understand how the discovery process works so that they can run these for themselves in the future. So we don't own these, but we do want to enable our customers to be able to run these on a regular basis. And many of them do. And perhaps it's in different teams or the same team every few months to review progress and uncover other kind of improvement opportunities. So it is a repeatable, or it's recommended to be a repeatable process, really. And in my mind, it's the foundation of something called Kaizen, or continuous improvement. We have to make sure we continuously get feedback and we continuously take action to improve how we do things, the way we do things, and who's involved in that. So I think those are the key outputs that people would enjoy from the workshop.
And it builds into an agile type of approach to development. I think it's the idea of continuous improvement is core to any type of, in quotes, agile approach that a customer might want to take for their development processes.
Yes, very much so.
Definitely core to that.
So, Alan, question for you now. What value do you think we as an outside agent bring to a discovery process?
Well, like you mentioned earlier, Atul, it's like that inquisitive child. We don't make any assumptions in what we ask or the way we do these discovery sessions. We just want to dig in and ask the questions that may not occur to the attendees. We're really acting primarily as facilitators. Like they say, the truth is out there, and we are there to help the attendees find it. We also have the advantage of, obviously, as you said, worked with many other organizations. We can spot the cracks in the process that may not be visible to someone who's been working with the company for a long time, because we have that overview of what's going on. We're not invested in the processes as such. We know from our experience what good has looked like for many of our customers. And we also know that going from good to great is a viable reality. We're not putting any artificial limits on the success. So our efforts are aimed towards opening up the attendees' minds to the art of the possible. And it's about shaping those needs and those views towards the success that that customer requires. Remember, because we're there to develop, to discover the best way forward for the customer, we're going to try and get the customer to achieve their goals on adopting the relevant processes and structures and frameworks to match what they think as their required endpoint. But it's also about actually defining that endpoint as well, because a lot of people don't know entirely where do we want to go. So we can give them that view on the art of the possible.
Yeah. So just to be clear, so we are supporting their own discovery in a way.
Absolutely.
Acting as facilitators. And I just read a comment in the chat from Louise. And I think it makes a lot of sense. Historically, she says it's something that not a lot of companies do, and they're too scared to map out their systems. And I can agree with that. We all are afraid sometimes, aren't we, to look at how we do things, because we're not perfect, and over time, bad habits develop, for example, or certain things become outdated. So we do have to face those fears sometimes, but we take it in a positive light, I think. So we've got to take always a positive way of taking that forward. Thanks for that comment, Louise.
So, taking it forward a little bit more, what guidance would you give to teams who are thinking of inviting us to support their discovery exercise?
Okay, so I think the first thing from our point of view is always communicate the framework around the workshop itself, because people need to understand they're coming to a gathering, a meeting, for a reason, and what to expect when they go into it, who's going to be there, etc. So we want to make sure that they understand that we're working in a safe environment. And as you said before, there's no blame, there's no shame. And I think this is quite a healthy thing to adopt into our culture generally, really. We're there as a team to work together to get better together. And we're also inviting people from different teams to collaborate in this exercise, because this is not going to be an exclusive club. We want the broader community to feel that they've been represented in whatever outcomes or actions are decided upon as a result of the workshop itself. So it's very inclusive in that sense. Also, we want to make sure that we do have leadership support, because quite often from workshops, there are going to be certain changes that are going to be recommended or adopted going forward. And there's always, with change, there's always some kind of a cost or a risk, and obviously a reward as well. But without having leadership backing, it's going to be very difficult to move any actions forward. So we want some kind of leadership or stakeholder support in the whole initiative. Also, I think it's worth mentioning that we're not going to be afraid to be looking at and commenting on the people and culture aspect as well, because looking at tools and processes, technical processes is one thing, but if we haven't got the buy-in from the people, then this is not going to move very far forward. So let's not assume this is a technical audit. It's actually very much about people and culture as well. So in terms of what's in it for us, we just want to make sure that as a BMC customer, they're getting the most value from any solutions that they may already own from us. Because like any solution, any product, if you take, for example, your Word or PowerPoint or Excel, we tend to narrow down and start using some just specific features, a handful of features of the tool, even though it can do a lot more. So we want to make sure that we can communicate the broader value of the solutions and encourage adoption of that. We want to help put some metrics around that as well, to make sure that as adoption increases, that there is growing value, and especially for the leadership and the stakeholders, there's growing return on investment from any solutions that they currently have. We also want to start to promote good practices. So although we have some great insights from many organizations around the world, we also want to learn from our customers. Anything great that they do that maybe we're not aware of, then we'd like to understand some of that as well. So it's a good learning exercise for us as part of that as well. So overall, it is a win-win, I think.
And I agree with you that the idea or the concept of the metrics being key, because as it's been said before, you can't improve what you can't measure.
Yes.
And I mean, it doesn't matter how those metrics are necessarily collected, so long as they are collected. And once you have the information, you can then analyze it and take a look at it. But metrics, as you say, they are key to getting that process, getting that discovery process working in the direction you want it to. to make sure that whatever you're discovering is taking you in the right direction.
Yes.
So to have those key performance indicators, those metrics, those lines of measurement in place, and to decide what they are, is absolutely key to getting the right discovery done.
And I think metrics is something a lot of people struggle with often. And again, our guests on the call today, I ask you to look at your own organization. What are the key metrics you measure yourself by in terms of your efficiency, the adoption of any technical tools that you already own, productivity, the quality of the code going into production? What are the metrics, and are they adhered to or not? So they quite often, it's a big topic, and I think we should maybe discuss that in a future session, but it's worth thinking about actually.
Cool. So we're at a point, I think, where we can start taking a look at any questions that people are possibly sending through.
Okay, I don't see anything in the chat.
I've got a couple here we can start with.
Okay.
So where are we? Would you do any product demos during the workshop?
Absolutely not. So the whole idea of discovery is to learn and understand. We're not going to stop to try to fix a problem at that point or demonstrate a solution. And it then becomes a sales exercise. This is not about selling. It's about just trying to understand a baseline where the organization is currently, and then make recommendations. And at a future point, if there's interest and a demo is required, obviously we can facilitate that. But absolutely, in the discovery workshops, no demos, not at all.
Okay, I've got another one. Do you find people are often afraid to open up in front of their colleagues? I can take that one.
Yeah.
It can start like that sometimes, but as we talked about earlier, it very quickly people realize that it is a safe environment. So names are not documented, they're not included in the outcome reports, unless they want them to be, obviously. Once the conversations start flowing, people, they do lose their inhibitions and they talk very freely. And I think they get surprised at the information that starts to come together, especially when they're dealing with people that maybe they haven't had a lot of work, a lot of experience dealing with in their own companies. They're not used to working with those teams, so it all becomes a lot more freer and open. Got one more here. How frequently should these discovery workshops take place?
Well, they should take place repeatedly, first of all. I think frequently it all depends how quickly the organization can act. So when a workshop takes place initially, there might be, say, 4 or 5 great initiatives come out of it. And as those initiatives complete, other things might become a higher priority. So I think it's quite a healthy thing to regularly be looking at your state, the current state you're in at that time. So it could be every 3 months, could be every 6 months, could be once a year. But I think it's not just a one-off exercise. It does need to happen again and again. Yeah. Obviously, it does take time and effort and people's time to contribute towards that, but definitely great value in doing that.
Cool. Don't see any more questions. So
hold on. There's anything else on there? What is the average duration of a discovery workshop? Okay, so obviously over the last few years, many of our workshops have been online, virtually as such. So they would typically take up to 3 hours, but we split that over, might do an hour and a half in the morning, an hour and a half in the afternoon, for example. If these were live in person, that could range from 1 day to a few days. It just depends on the scope of what we're analyzing. Is it just, for example, the testing aspect of your delivery process? Is it the whole end-to-end process? Is it just inspecting how developer productivity can be improved? So it depends on the scope of that. So recently I've been doing a few virtually, which have simply taken, I think, 3 hours, and we've got some good output from that as well. And also, as Alan mentioned earlier, sometimes we find that we do a deep dive into specific areas. Then we might have a couple of small follow-up sessions with the relevant people to make sure we provide a complete report. So yeah, hope that answers the question.
Anything else? Don't think so.
Something else currently.
So, Atul, have you got any final thoughts you'd like to leave with our audience?
So, seeing as you shared a personal story earlier, so let me share my one, because I think it's quite important. It makes a good point. And this was a couple of years ago. I just come back from a trip to South Africa where I was visiting some of our wonderful customers. And I was having a chat with my son, and he said to me, "Why do you always refer to them as high-performing organization? What makes them high-performing?" And from my point of view, although I was using those words subconsciously, I explained that those organizations were consistently in a discovery mode. They were always asking themselves, how do we do things now? Why do we do it like this? What needs improving, or why doesn't it improving, and who can help us? So they're always open to external help with that. And how can it be improved? And so all these questions they're asking themselves all the time. And the whole mindset or the process has now become a habit to them. And everything they see as an opportunity, I've never seen them sit still and wish or hope, something will happen and everything will be fine. It's always very proactive and very positive. And to quote a Nike slogan to my son, I just said, they just do it. And ultimately, I think from a personal perspective, I want all my clients to adopt that growth mindset. It's a matter of just doing it. Don't let anything get in your way. So I hope that brief story does inspire some of our guests to take a shift in mindset, really, and think about what are the opportunities that they have and that they could be focusing on. So anyway, so with that story, let me hand over now to Terry to close off the conversation today.
Thank you so much, Alan and Atul. Before I go into next steps and some of the follow-ups, I want to reflect back on Alan's story that he told. And it's interesting, he said it's a different perspective. And what I was hearing when he was telling the story was, well, if I build my framework first, so I have my outline of my puzzle, because I love jigsaw puzzles, then I kind of know where I want to go. And I separate it into different, different colors or different, I want the blues at the tops and the greens at the bottom. So I didn't see it as much as a different perspective, but putting a framework around what I'm trying to achieve. So it was just interesting that I thought of it that way. So again, thank you both for sharing with us. So what are our next steps to everybody that's joined us today? The first is go out there and do some research on, what you want to achieve, what a discovery workshop would mean to you. There is a blog, 10 Strategies for Mainframe DevOps Success, that was co-authored by Atul and Mark Schettenhelm, who is one of our product managers. So that would be the first thing I would tell you to do. The second is, in many ways, this was just an introduction to what a discovery workshop was, just getting you to think along those ways. But if you want more details on who should attend these, how long is a typical session? There's somebody asked that question. Can we do it on site, remote? What's an example of the results? All those types of commitment questions. Please reach out to myself, to your TAM, your TAC, your SC, anybody in the organization, and we can do a follow-up with just your company on, what it would, what a workshop entails. Next is the next takeaway. Next step is, if you haven't seen the first few sessions, you can find them out on YouTube. We are working on getting them on bmc.com. I would also ask you to look for registration emails for upcoming sessions. The last few sessions have been more around concept, of DevOps and Agile and getting your mindset in there. Now we're going to start getting into more specifics on things that can be done to enhance, your DevOps journey to address some of your challenges. So next month's session, June 23rd, is breaking the bottleneck. And this discussion is how to include your database changes, within that DevOps, within that pipeline. And then July's is tired of chaos, resolving from ABENs from A to Z. And it's how you can now, we have some new features coming out in July that I'm not going to give the world away, but it's got some alerting that's going to come out in ABEN. And then how using Z Advisor, you can start monitoring your ABENs, because if you don't measure it, you don't know if you're getting better. And then last but not least, again, thank you, Atul and Alan. We would love for everybody to take the survey. We will get the takeaway, the aid memory that Atul mentioned at the beginning of the session. We will get that out to everybody. Thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you. Take care.